Hi, my name is Jenelle Riley. I'm an editor at Variety, and I'm so thrilled to be here today for this SAG-AFTRA Conversation at Home with today's guest. He's a Grammy Award winner, a two-time Tony Award nominee for his work in Book of Mormon and Falsettos, and he currently stars as the Whiz Kid of Wall Street on Black Monday. Please welcome Andrew Rannells. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sorry, I was kind of bobbing and weaving during that intro because I was getting into the Blair energy.
I know, there's a lot of cokey energy with Blair, so you have to be sort of on edge.
This is primarily for audiences of SAG members, so I always actually like to start by asking, how did you get your SAG card?
I got my SAG card through, wait for it, Sex and the City 2.
Really?
Yes.
That's so cool.
Yes. I got my AFTRA card doing, I had done a lot of voiceover work, and that's how I ultimately ended up getting my AFTRA card. But my SAG card I got through doing Sex and the City 2.
That's really cool. You were in the wedding scene?
I was in the wedding scene. Good eye. I don't think you can see me, but we did it it was one of those jobs that like we started and then it lasted for, I think, 2 weeks. It was supposed to be 4 days, and then it was 2 weeks of us just going back and back and back and like, yeah.
That's cool.
But it was really fun, and this was must have been 2009, I want to say, 2008. The best part was Michael Patrick King came up to it was this like ensemble of Broadway sort of like chorus kids. And he was asking us all, he was like, would you guys want to stick around and watch Liza Minnelli sing Single Ladies?
What?
And we were like, yeah. And that lasted for several days.
That's amazing. And you got paid for it.
And I got paid for it. And I just watched Liza Minnelli sing Single Ladies for
That is
several days.
phenomenal. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you kind of started performing at a young age.
I mean, yeah, I moved to New York when I was 19, and I was in college for the first, few years, and then I started doing a lot of voiceover work, and that was really, but I didn't really, the first on-camera job I ever had was Sex and the City. I was a headless stripper. So I was like background. You never saw my face, but it was just like my neck down. I was in a Speedo dancing on a bar. But that was my first.
Totally recognized you.
Right. So that was my first on-camera job. And then the next time I ever worked on camera was my first episode of Girls in 2011. Was my first episode there. So it took a while for me to get my foot in the door there, but well worth it.
Well, and you were doing a lot of stage work in that time, I know.
Yeah, no, I was lucky I was in Hairspray, and then I was in Jersey Boys, but sometimes it's a little bit of a tricky leap to go from working on Broadway to then working on camera, even though New York City is filmed, there's so many things that are filmed there. It's sometimes hard because of the schedule. So if directors know that like this is a guy who's in a Broadway show, they're probably only available on Mondays. So it's a little tricky to book that work. But eventually I got to. So that was nice.
And you mentioned Girls, which is like, it was such a great role. And I think that was the last time we saw you on sort of a regular basis on television. Were you looking to do TV when Black Monday came your way?
I was. I mean, Girls was ending, and I was, hopeful to, both find another Broadway show, which I was doing falsettos at the time. Is that right? No, it's not right. I had done falsettos, but then I had done a workshop of Boys in the Band and then shot the pilot for Black Monday. We did the run of Boys in the Band, and then I got to go and film Black Monday. So it was really a very lucky timing for me, and I felt very fortunate that it all lined up in the way that it did. But it was, I was definitely looking for another series and looking for something that was going to be a little different and and this show came about. Seth Rogen sent me a script that he was like, I'm producing the script, and I think that maybe this might be something you would be interested in. And he had seen the Book of Mormon years before.
Oh, you
And
got tickets. That's great.
but in a lot of ways, Blair sort of really does, he looks a lot like Elder Price, the part that I played in the Book of Mormon, if you know that show at all, that like he starts in very sort of naive and then very quickly learns that life is not the way, it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. So, yeah, so in a lot of ways, there was a lot of similarities to that. And I didn't really get to do that on Girls. A lot, like the character I played on Girls, Elijah, was always a little bit more savvy and always a little bit like more cynical. And it was nice to return to somebody who was a little more optimistic for a while.
I don't ever mean to complain about typecasting because it's being cast and that's great.
Yeah.
But were you getting a lot of roles like that sent your way after Girls?
In some ways, yeah. I think a lot of questions as to like, would he be interested in playing this woman's gay best friend and things like that. Like, yeah, a little bit. And it didn't always all line up, and some of it did, and some of it was great, and some of it wasn't. And I just feel very fortunate that I was able to kind of take my time and say, like, you know, I want to make sure that the next project is correct. And obviously when something comes along that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg are doing, and Don Cheadle and Regina Hall are involved in, like, you're like, yeah, that seems right.
It's funny.
That seems like the right project.
Until you mentioned sort of the wide-eyedness of that Blair shares with Elder Price, I never really thought about how like they are kind of in the same vein, although Blair is a little bit more morally compromised, yeah. I would say. But that's got to be fun.
He's a little quicker to the party in terms of figuring out, like, oh, I need to change my perception here. Which is easier to, I mean, it was very fun to do in the Book of Mormon because it happened sort of very naturally over the course of 2.5 hours. These scripts that David Caspin and Jordan Can wrote it was like a nice sort of slow build as to like how he sort of figures it out. So it was a similar feeling, but a different challenge.
Yeah.
Figuring that out. So it was really fun.
Well, it's kind of interesting because when the second season premiered, in a lot of ways, Blair got everything he wanted, you know? But he's realizing it's maybe not all it's cracked up to be. I was actually surprised to see he and Tiffany got married.
I know. We did do it, and Casey Wilson, who plays Tiffany, is so great, and she, I feel like in a lot of ways, like it's a nice relationship to see, particularly given the time period of this film, that of the series, that relationships that like that might have been made, compromises might have been made, might they have been so clearly described? I don't know, but in our show, Blair, you know, very clearly goes to her and says, like, this is the deal. You want what you want. I want what I want. I think we should do this. And then we do.
Yeah. And
out to be, for the most part of the second season, it's it's not going terribly for them. Figure it out, which makes me think, like, should I have just married a girl? I don't know.
It's not too late.
Never too late.
I actually am curious because it occurred to me, this series is set in 1987 and you were probably like 5 years old then.
I was 9 years old.
Wow. Did you know anything about the real Black Monday? Yeah. I feel like I'd heard the term.
No, I was, my parents, I was in Nebraska. My parents were, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was a small business owner. No, I didn't know much about it, but learning about it as we were gearing up to start shooting it was really interesting because what I guess I learned more than anything about the financial world in general is that everything is cyclical. Mm-hmm. And I think obviously we're experiencing a version of that it's not the same version right now. I'm not to say that, but like just financial cycles just continue. So there will always be some rises and there will always be some falls. And that's what I thought was sort of most interesting about this particular show, is that we were coming out of the 2008 financial crisis and then making the show, and it was all sort of happening again. And it's all mostly greed based, right? Like people just lose track of sort of what has happened and what they've gained and what was lost, and then people just sort of forget, and it just keeps happening, that nobody remembers, like, oh yeah, people suffer for these choices. It was really it was an interesting time to be making the show.
It's strange to watch the show and you can forget it's set in the 80s because some of the things they do and say feel so completely topical today.
Well, and some of it is really, yes, and it is really, especially the sexism of the show, I feel like, with Regina's character specifically, that's obviously something that we're still very much dealing with today, and that in some ways things are better, but I can't say that anyone has really learned a ton, unfortunately. And that's sort of where the comedy comes into play, but also sometimes when we film those scenes, it feels a little sad. You're like, I wish we had learned more. I wish we were further away from this, but that's not where we are.
Yeah, you always think, look how far we've come. And then you're like, oh, maybe not so much.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, do you have any, Blair is such a whiz kid and this is a whole world that I don't understand. How did you sort of prepare to play a character in that world and in that time period?
Well, I think that the financial stuff was so much over my head that I could not obviously imagine to get like an MBA in finance before we started shooting the series. So we had some great folks who were helping us out with sort of the details of that, and David and Jordan were so great about piecing it together and explaining it to us. But I thought like the larger issue at hand was why human greed takes place. And why these people got sort of power hungry when they did. And my character, in a lot of ways, was kind of the easiest to start with because he was a guy who went in with like great intentions,
Mm-hmm.
and got greedy. And it was sort of very easy, not easy, but it was like clear to see like, oh, I could see how this could happen to this guy that he thought, oh, I'm untouchable now. And in the second season, as we veer more into the Washington side of things and bank deregulation and how quickly can he get himself in touch with these congressmen who are making these decisions and are pushing for these decisions, it became even more clear that I was like, oh, I could see how this guy could kind of lose his way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
You mentioned this incredible cast, and especially in the first season, Blair's one of the few people who's willing to go sort of toe-to-toe with Mo, Don Cheadle's character. What is it like, getting to share these great combative scenes with, one of the greatest living actors we have?
I was very intimidated by him in the pilot. I had met him before during the Book of Mormon, and I knew that he was like a nice man. But I had never worked with him before. But when we were shooting the pilot, it was very clear that he was a very collaborative actor and going to be very friendly and fun to work with. So that sort of took the intimidation away a lot. And I think we've settled into a nice kind of routine now, John and I. Regina was the real big surprise because I had always just loved her. I just thought she was so funny and so great. And then we just completely fell in love.
She's so great.
She's just the best. So when we started working together, and we had a lot to do together in the first season. We have a little bit less to do in the second season, but we still are together a lot. But man, oh man, she's just the greatest.
She's so great.
I just love her.
Everyone who comes on the show, like even if they just come in for one episode, it is amazing.
We have some really great. Michael Hitchcock is with us for most of the season. Michael Hitchcock is like, he's so great. And I had Casey and I, was it the first? No. It was Regina and I the first day he was there. And we were both so obsessed with all of the Christopher Guest films that all of a sudden now Michael Hitchcock is here, that we were like, oh God. And they were asking us to improvise with him. And I was like, how do we do this? I don't think I'm qualified.
Wow.
But he was so wonderful. June Diane Raphael is also on the show. She plays Tuck Watkins, who plays my love interest this season. She plays his wife. And she and Tuck and June have like this crazy, weird Republican dynamic that is so fun to watch. And it just continues. You know, our season got a little interrupted.
Yeah.
We weren't able to air our final 4 episodes because they weren't able to be edited, but we'll be back on June 28th and we'll get back into the swing of that. So I'm excited to show folks how the season wraps up.
So you finished shooting, they just needed time to edit them.
It was just the back end sort of, you know, there's a lot of work that goes on after we finish shooting and editing and sound correction and all of those things that like, it just made it a little harder to do in March. So, you know, not everybody felt comfortable going into a studio, obviously, and which is understandable. And so, yeah, so we had to take a little pause. But I just started rewatching The Sopranos this week. And I forgot that it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing, but hear me out. That they split up their last season. And I was like, oh, well, other shows did it.
Yeah.
It's okay. You do like half a season and then you air the second half of the season.
Breaking Bad did it too.
Breaking Bad did it too.
There you go. You're in good company.
Yeah. So it's fine. People are, you know, have been very responsive to the first part of the season. So hopefully they'll enjoy the finale.
Can you tell us, give us a hint on what's in store for the upcoming episodes?
I can say for Blair's character, Blair has to make some really tough decisions because as you mentioned, you know, he has this marriage that he's juggling that we're not really sure what those motivations are. And then he's also started this relationship with a Republican congressman played by Tuck Watkins. That is, you really don't know what those motivations are either. Like, does he actually like him? Is he just doing this for the congressional help? And we're sort of left a little unclear up to this point. So in the back end of the season, I think you figure out sort of what Blair's motivations are, and it gets a little dark.
Because I really want things to work out between them.
I know. Particularly because he's my actual boyfriend.
That's what I heard. That's amazing.
Would be nice. But yeah, so we'll see. We'll see how that goes.
And June and Paul Scheer are married too.
I know.
So, like,
June and Paul Scheer are married. Casey and David Casp, who created the show, are married. It's a real Love American style situation over at Black Mountain.
I love that.
Yeah, we're all, hanging out. So it's nice because it does feel like, and it always felt like in the beginning of the series, that we were just sort of, you know, friendly and together, and we had all known each other before, which was nice. So it's been just a really great set to be a part of. So yeah.
And you're able to leave that relationship at work and not bring home any feelings for his character at the end of the day.
Well, Tuck and I we met doing Boys in the Band on Broadway, and we just filmed we just finished the film version of Boys in the Band for Netflix for Ryan Murphy this past summer, so that'll be out in the fall. Yeah, so we've worked together before, which made it a little easier.
You mentioned that you got to meet Don Cheadle at Book of Mormon. Was there anyone you didn't meet at Book of Mormon? I'm curious because I remember the night I was there, I saw some
I
big
mean,
names coming through.
I know there were a lot of people, and like we would joke sometimes that it was like backstage was like a little weird People's Choice Awards. That like as people as actors who were very sort of new on the scene and didn't really know anyone, it was sometimes kind of tricky to be like, who do I go to first? As they're all standing on stage, sort of like waiting to say hello, and how do you pick? And the best night, one of my favorite nights I remember, it was Bernadette Peters was there, who was like, I'm a musical theater kid. So like, she's in for me, you know what I mean? So she was there, and Sean Penn was there.
Oh my God, Sophie's Choice.
So I went to Bernadette Peters because I was like, I have to follow my heart here. And we talked for a long while. And then she looked at me and she said, why are you talking to me? Sean Penn is beside me.
I love that.
You're Bernadette Peters. What? It's Bernadette Peters. And she was like, go talk to Sean Penn. So then, but I had to go to Bernadette Peters first because I was like, I just have to.
No, I understand. I think you made the right call.
You know, it's like you can't deny that love.
What's funny is when I saw Book of Mormon, I saw it at a matinee, and that night I saw Bernadette in Follies. Was that what she was doing then?
Yeah,
There was
she was
a time when you guys overlapped. Yeah. So I actually got to see you both in the same day.
oh my God. She's just the best.
Oh, she's amazing. And Sean Penn liked the show? I think he's funnier than people know.
No, he was so nice. No,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say that I had a bad experience. I think that show, The Book of Mormon, I think was such a joyful experience in general that anytime anybody came backstage, it's not like anybody was like crying or feeling sad. It was like everybody was like ready to party. So we had Josh and I had some really good times with folks that were just like, come on, boys, come with us. All right.
And did that really lead to, because you mentioned Seth Rogen saw you in that, did that sort of lead to the Black Monday offer?
Yeah. I mean, it was 7 years later. But in that time, I had done Girls and The New Normal for Ryan Murphy. And, you know, I had done other things. And oftentimes in Los Angeles, you have these meetings. When I was doing the Book of Mormon, I came out here for a week to take some like general meetings, which I didn't know what that meant, but it just means like you go around town and like meet folks and producers and directors and studio heads, and you just basically are just, you know, saying, I'm available. And Lena Dunham, we had filmed the first season of Girls, but it hadn't aired yet. And she told me, she was like, it's the water bottle tour of New York. Of LA. And I said, what does that mean? And she was like, well, when you get into your rental car, there's just going to be empty water bottles because every time that you go into a meeting, they give you a water.
That's awesome.
And then when you leave the meeting, you have this like Pellegrino or a whatever it is. And you're like, okay. And then you just like toss it into your rental car. And she was right. By the end of the week, I just had like a sea of plastic bottles that I had tossed into my car, into my like Yaris. And I was like, great. But I met Seth. Seth was the first meeting I had when I came out to LA. And he was like, we'll find something. Let's look for something. And everybody said that. I had, I think, 30 meetings that week. And everybody said, would love to meet with you. Would love to work with you. But Seth was one of the few that actually then came back many years later and was like, I have this thing that I think you would be right for. Which I appreciate so much that I had not seen him in many years, but he just like out of nowhere was like, I got a script for you. And I think it might be for you.
That's really cool. What is the biggest challenge of playing Blair, especially in this most recent season? I actually often wonder, just on a superficial level, I think it would be hard for me not to laugh during takes.
Well, it's definitely hard to laugh. Yes, that's definitely hard. I had sort of a hard time keeping track of his humanity in some way, of just like making sure that I was playing a human and not some sort of villain, or I just wanted to make sure that I was presenting as like a human being at all times. So I think that was the hardest part, because you don't ever want to, even if people are doing things that are morally questionable, you don't ever want to lead with that. You want to lead with whatever their motivation is, right? So they're thinking that this is good for them somehow, or good for someone else somehow, and so I had to kind of keep track of that, because I didn't want him to come off as being as any sort of bad guy, even though some people might have some trouble with what he did, but or what he does. But no, I just wanted to make sure he seemed like a human.
Do you see him as the villain?
I don't.
Yeah. I don't really either, but that just might because I enjoy him so much.
I don't. And I think that, he makes some choices in these final 4 episodes that are a little questionable, but I don't know what that says about me, that I don't think he's the villain, but I just think he's trying his best. Let's go with that. He's trying his best.
But those are the characters that are fun to play in those shades of gray, yeah.
I don't generally get to do a lot of that, so it was fun to, it's fun to get to do it.
Why do you think you don't get cast as that?
I mean, you know what? I've been very lucky that Girls ran for 6 years. I had a solid television job that then I did that, and then I got to go back to Broadway every hiatus and do a show, and then occasionally do like a movie in between, and it was a really nice, it was a really great experience doing Girls. But it was 6 years of my life, and that even included doing a year of The New Normal, which was a show that I was very proud of, but didn't run as long as we had hoped. But I don't know. I've always just wanted to try to be kind of as diverse as possible in terms of genres, and obviously starting in the theater, that's always where I feel most comfortable. So if I have an opportunity to come back to the theater, I'm so excited to come back and do that. And that specific show gave me the opportunity to go back and do many shows on Broadway, which was really great. And I'm really grateful for them to that.
I'm curious because you've done so many seminal shows on stage and on screen, and of course, movie-wise, you were in A Simple Favor, which people are obsessed with. They love that movie. When people see you, what do they want to talk about? Is there a particular character that sticks with them?
It kind of depends on the neighborhood. It's weird. Like in New York, it's very like if I'm downtown or in Brooklyn, people will recognize me from Girls. If I'm in Midtown, people will recognize me for my work on Broadway. If I'm in an airport, it's for A Simple Favor, or the 2 episodes of How I Met Your Mother. Right. It's weird things like that, and it just shows you how diverse audiences are now. And I don't know if that's good or bad in terms of like how people watch television or but there's so much programming out. And it makes me, you just realize as an actor that like, it's hard to sort of catch a single audience. It's not the days of NBC in the 90s anymore. It's a much harder way to find sort of who your audience is. So, I'm thrilled that I am able to sort of cut across some genres, and I'm happy that I get to meet so many different people. But it's a different situation than when there were just 3 channels,
right,
on the air. Like, the number of people who will say to me like, "Oh, I saw you're on a show, but I don't have that channel." Or like, even still to this day, people are like, "Ugh, I want to watch Girls. I should catch up." And be like, "Ma'am, that was years ago."
And right now you have the time.
Seasons to catch up on. When do you get to do that? And that's okay. But it's just funny that like that's not how people watch TV anymore. So, and I feel like with I don't know if you feel the same way, but like obviously there are shows that a lot of people talk about, but then there are shows that some friend will say like, "Did you see blah blah blah?" And you're like, "No, what is that on?" They're like, "Oh, it's on blah blah. It's the new this thing." And I have a constant list of shows that I need to catch up on because there's so much to see, which is very exciting, but it also makes it hard to figure out like how do you reach an audience? How do you do that?
That's so funny you say that because I literally have a list of shows and I'm getting through them because of quarantine.
And now it's the time that I thought I would be like, oh, I'll see everything, but now I have not seen everything.
Things come up, and actually to that end, for those of you watching at home, you can find information about SAG-AFTRA Foundation's COVID-19 Relief Fund in the comments. I'm just sort of asking everybody, what's keeping you going creatively during this time? Are you finding you can work on things, or because you know they always say Shakespeare wrote King Lear in quarantine, and I'm like, well, he had years.
I'm not doing that. But I wrote a book that was published last March in 2019, a book of essays about sort of my early years in New York, and have started writing more, and I'm working on a couple screenplays now, which have kept me very busy, and I'm about to direct an episode. Eventually we'll be directing an episode of Modern Love for Amazon.
Oh, that's so cool.
Based on a Modern Love essay that I wrote. So I feel very fortunate that I'm able to do a lot of writing in this time, but acting wise, it's hard because you don't get to do that thing that you would like to do. Although we're putting together, like I just spent the better half of today putting together a Book of Mormon. We're doing a mini Book of Mormon reunion with Josh Gad, like just singing some songs and doing some things. And everybody's trying to figure out how to be their own sound engineer, which is tricky. But done a few things like that, and it's been nice to revisit. I got to do a video like that for Jersey Boys and that I was in, and for Hairspray that I was in, and Lin-Manuel has asked me to be a part of a video that he was putting together, and so it's nice to be able to sort of tap into some of that stuff that you're doing. It doesn't feel the same, but at the same time, it's really nice to be able to get to do a little bit of performing for folks. So it's
so much fun to watch too. I'm so glad that people are still out there creating content,
and a lot of shows are doing it, which is great. And I hope that they keep doing it. So,
the scripts you're writing, are they for you to act in or direct, or maybe both?
Not so much for me to act in. Casey Wilson and I are adapting a book for Universal, which is great. So we're working on that right now. And then my friend Susanna Shokowski and I are writing a screenplay together. Just things that we like, we're able to locked down sort of before all of this started, and now seems like the best time to get working on it. So that's what we're doing.
Great. Take that, Shakespeare. He only did King Lear. One play. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and remind everyone to check out these final episodes of Black Monday. I'm so glad it's coming back.
Me too. I know, with a little bit of a hiccup, but now we're back.